So good morning, everybody. Now that everybody's here, I'd like to call to order this Parks and Trails Strategic Plan Development Standing Committee meeting. First, I'd like to acknowledge that the TNRD acknowledges that we connect with many First Nation communities across our vast regional district, and today are located on the Kamloops the Secwepemc territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwepemc Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership that we have with the Kamloops the Secwepemc and respect the territory and land on which we gather today. First order is, do we have any additions or deletions from the agenda? Nope. Okay. And then, the next item is 4.1 Parks, Trails, and Strategic Plan Development Standing Committee meeting minutes from September 3rd, 2024. Can I have a mover? Moved by Tricia, Director Thorpe, and seconded by Director Smith. Thank you. Director Thorpe.
Just a quick mention with the minutes. It said in the minutes that the meeting was held in this room. I believe it was held in, is it called the Voodoo Room or whatever the room is on the third floor? Just a tiny correction, and maybe I'm being picky.
Can we get a mover to amend the minutes? Moved by Director Thorpe and seconded by Director Smith.
I'm your bid spotter.
And sorry, thank you. And all in favor? Oh, sorry. Discussions? Yes. Oh, okay. Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? No. Okay. So moved. And yes, Director Lepso. Oh, not yet. Sorry. For the roundtable, you mean? Sorry, discussion on which topic?
Well, I just noticed that it's in one of the reports, it said District of Chase instead of Village of Chase. I don't know if this is the time to mention it or not.
Oh, under section 6.
Somewhere in the report when it's saying I was at the meeting, it mentioned.
Oh, okay.
Somewhere in the report, District of Chase. And it's the Village of Chase. I didn't know.
Okay. Can we have a motion to amend that in the reports?
We could just note those changes and change it, and you can adopt it as we'll make those changes.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item
so
number.
You do still need to vote to adopt the minutes, though.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah, those in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 5, delegations.
No delegations, we can move on to reports.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, item number 6, reports. For discussion, the committee report from our consultants. Are we having the presentation from, okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, we'll turn it over to Ivy Smith with Lees and Associates. So she'll walk us through the findings of the first round of consultation, the what we heard report that's attached, and then have a discussion following that. So we can turn it over to Ivy.
Great, thanks, Jamie and the chair. I'll just share my screen. Can everyone see that and hear me okay?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Great.
Yep.
Okay. So welcome. I'm Ivy Smith. For those of you who didn't meet me at the last standing committee meeting, I'm one of the landscape architects with Lees and Associates working on this project with the TNRD team, and I'm joined today by my colleagues Megan Turnock, principal of Lees and Associates, and Patrick Beach, who's also on the project team. He's a landscape architect as well. So today we'll provide a summary of what we heard during the first round of engagement for this project. And then I believe we'll pause for a roundtable and then we'll highlight the next steps of the project and subsequent meetings for this standing committee. So I wanted to note throughout the presentation today, if you do have questions or points of discussion, to please either raise your hand or just speak up, and I'll try to pause for those discussions and questions. But we're also happy to take questions at the end of the presentation if you want to do that as well. So we are currently in phase 3 of the project, anticipating the draft strategy to be completed in January. And we'll go into more detail as to what the next steps are for this project after the roundtable. So we finished round 1 of engagement in September. And just a reminder, the purpose of the first round of engagement was to offer opportunities for staff, interested parties, rights holders, and the public to provide information about how they currently use parks and trails in the TNRD, barriers to participation, needs, gaps, and opportunities, and share community values. So during this engagement, we held two meetings with First Nations, including Whispering Pines Clinton Indian Band, and Simp First Nation, as well as one staff workshop, one member municipality workshop, one workshop with electoral area representatives, a meeting with Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, as well as Rec Sites and Trails BC, one accessibility committee meeting, and then 7 community group workshops, which included recreation groups, tourism groups, environmental groups from all electoral areas. And we also held an online public survey. The second round of engagement is targeted to take place in March, April 2025. And this second phase of engagement will aim to collect community feedback on the draft vision, goals, and recommendations, as well as discuss priorities. That will include a second online public survey, a virtual public open house, and 4 community group workshops. So diving into what we heard from the municipalities and electoral area representatives, addressing gaps and improving connectivity. We know that from the inventory and analysis that the TNRD parks and trails are not necessarily equally distributed across the region, and we received comments on expressing the need to fill those gaps when considering expansion of the TNRD parks and trails networks. We also heard about the importance of trails. Key issues included inadequate funding for trail maintenance for user group conflicts on trails, and potentially a lack of accessible trails. In terms of partnership and community support, participants saw opportunities for working with various governmental entities as well as community groups for various parks and trails initiatives, and similarly creating buy-in with the community and potentially considering a community working group for parks and trails improvements were discussed as well. Adapting parks and trails to climate change was a common theme heard throughout the entire engagement, and we'll hear a bit more about this as I cover the community group's findings. An improved marketing strategy for TNRD parks and trails was seen as a major opportunity, and better life cycle costing when developing new projects was also mentioned. From First Nations, we heard about the potential for partnership and collaboration, specifically on signage and tourism initiatives. And there was also a strong emphasis on the need for early and ongoing communications and consultation regarding parks and trails. So we reached out to over 50 community groups to receive feedback, and we heard back from about 27 of these groups during our 7 community workshops. This is a list of the groups that participated in those 7 community group workshops. Key findings from the community groups were for signage, wayfinding, and interpretive elements, there were suggestions for interpretive signage relating to environmental or cultural significance within parks and trails, as well as suggesting signage to manage user conflicts. We heard a lot about the fact that funding exists for new parks or trails, but not necessarily for ongoing maintenance. And this was a major issue that we heard from several groups throughout the engagement there. Groups also struggled with volunteer succession and retention. We heard some suggestions for longer trail connections and connecting communities to parks via trails. And we also heard the need for parks to adapt to a changing climate. For example, wildfire management, need for shade, and invasive plant management were all mentioned. We heard about the need for accessible features in parks and trails, such as adaptive mountain bike trails. And we also heard that a common barrier to visiting parks and trails was a lack of a personal vehicle. In terms of collaboration and communication, we heard that user groups are having challenges navigating the administrative and bureaucratic systems between governments and other user groups. And it was suggested that the TNRD could play a larger role with facilitating collaboration and partnership by assisting with application of administrative processes for parks and trails improvement initiatives. In terms of the online survey, we received 315 total responses, and nearly 1 in 5 respondents were from Kamloops, with Clearwater, Barrier, and electoral area J also pretty well represented in the survey respondents. Top activities that people participate in parks and trails were walking, swimming, beach or lake access, dog walking, and camping. And most people used parks and trails either weekly or monthly. In terms of barriers, 20% of survey respondents identified that there were no barriers to using parks and trails, but out of the barriers identified, the main ones were lack of time or too busy, difficult to reach, or too far to travel, and lack of information available. For park visitation, the regional parks were the most visited, as well, and Agate Boat Launch and Ferry Road Park were visited by over half of survey respondents as well. So just over 50% of respondents were satisfied with the variety of park amenities, signage and information, and overall quality of parks and trails. However, there were mixed feelings around the number of parks and trails in the TNRD. Top values for parks and trails were access to nature, walking, access to water, washrooms, viewpoints, and viewing areas. And the desired features in parks and trails really aligned with these values. People wanted to see more shoreline and water access, walking, hiking trails, as well as washrooms, and other ideas for improvements and desired features included picnic areas, campgrounds, scenic viewpoints, and cultural heritage sites. We received many suggestions for future park sites, which will need to be vetted and considered with other factors, including gaps within the existing system. And lastly, over 50% of respondents were supportive of a tax increase to better fund the parks and trails improvements. So to summarize, some key themes emerging from the engagement were inter-organization collaboration, maintenance and volunteers, trail distribution and access, regional trail connections, signage, accessibility, climate adaptation, environmental protection, and tourism. And these themes will help to develop the vision, goals, and recommendations moving into the draft strategic plan development. So I'll pause here and hand it over to the chair to lead the roundtable, and we can also take questions if there are any.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Ivy. Is there any questions from our members for Ivy about the presentation? Director Lepso?
When you said one member municipality, did that happen to be Chase? Do you know?
We held a meeting with a variety of member municipality groups. So I think we had I'd have to go and check what the participation was, but Chase was there, I believe. There were several other member municipalities present as well.
Thank you, Ivy. I have a question regarding the community groups workshops. As we mentioned, there's electoral areas which are underdeveloped in terms of existing TNRD parks and trails. Did you find in those electoral areas there were less community groups to engage with you in the project so far? And would you find that an issue?
We really tried to have an equal spread of representation across electoral areas when we were looking for inviting community groups. It would be I don't think we had like full like a very strong participation from one versus another so far, but we really tried to engage throughout the TNRD as a whole.
Thank you, Ivy. And one of the items I saw in the reports, user group conflicts being brought up by community groups. I think maybe I can use this to segue into our roundtable. Director Lepso and Director Onslow and I, as well as Ms. Madden, we went to the Shuswap Trail Alliance roundtable on Tuesday, and I found that was very helpful to see how other regions, not necessarily regional district or orders of government, but nonprofit groups formed a committee of sorts themselves to, resolve these user group conflicts. For example, we heard very strongly from two speakers from First Nations who actually gave a bit of a pushback in the rapid development or the pace of development of trails in respect to the land. So yeah, just sharing with the group what I found, and perhaps in Director Lepso or Director Onslow. Thank you. Go ahead, Director Onslow.
Okay, thank you. Ivy, thank you for the presentation. I just had a question about who were the 7 community groups that you did have for the engagement, and were they chosen or did they reach out to you to be engaged with?
So I'll just clarify that we held 7 community workshops, but there were several groups represented at each of the workshops, and I will pull up the slide where we have the list of community groups that participated in all of those workshops.
Okay.
So we don't have them broken into who participated in which workshop, but these were all of the community groups that participated in all 7 community workshops. So I think there were about 4 or 5 per workshop.
Thank you. And then were the workshops, they were held online, so it wasn't a survey?
right.
They were
That's right.
online? Okay.
Yep, there
And-
were 1-hour workshops held online.
Okay, that's perfect. That's great. And then another question that from the presentation was the life cycle costing for new designs. Can you just elaborate on that? Like if we were, is that just saying that we need to have an asset management plan for the parks essentially?
Yeah, that's essentially what was suggested.
Okay. And then just one last comment. I really like the idea that we got the suggestion that the TNRD would be able to help the nonprofit groups and organizations with government interrelations and applications, et cetera. I think that is one area that we could certainly step up to help the people in this area. So thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Onslow. Sorry, I have one more comment with regards to the community groups that have been engaged. I wonder, because I saw there was a bit of a lack of feedback from businesses this project so far has been focused on user groups, but our parks and trails benefit a lot of our economic opportunities in rural areas. I wonder if it would be beneficial, or if the committee feels it would be beneficial to direct the next stage of the survey to reach out a bit more to businesses. What are any feedback, comments from our committee? Thank you, Director Lepso.
Yeah, so like the Village of Chase has been involved in this for, I don't know, since 2010. My thinking, like we started out like this and it just eventually grew with the success. Like this is good to start with. And I think it will involve, like we evolved, right? As the success went along, more businesses came aboard, and you saw what happened at the last meeting, right? That's evolved over 14 years to get to that level.
Thank you, Director Lepso. So, sorry, Director Smith.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask about ATVBC. I see Thompson Valley ORV Club is included there, but we do have a lot of representation from ATVBC in this area as well. So I just wondered about them.
Yeah, Ms. Smith, if you can speak to that, thank you.
Yeah, do you mind sharing what the acronym represents? ATBBC, is that?
Sorry, ATVBC,
ATV.
all-terrain vehicles, British Columbia.
Okay. We can double check. We did, like I mentioned, we reached out to 50 plus groups, so they might have been, there were lots of groups that we reached out to that we just didn't hear back from, or didn't participate. But we can certainly add that group to the next round of engagement if they're not already on the list.
Thank you. Director Onslow, I see you still have your hand up or? No? Okay. Okay, thank you. So yeah, I'm sorry, moving on to the roundtable opportunity for, sorry, my apologies. Let me step back. Does staff have any comments on like how you feel if this scope of the project so far is too wide, too narrow at this stage, I think? Thank you, Mr. Vieira.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll provide a bit of context from where we're coming from. I think this is how we envision the process to roll out. So to kind of sort of ground us, to bring us back to where we started from, the idea of this first round of public engagement was sort of a blank canvas. Go out there and ask the public through public surveys, but then also trying to reach out directly to all the groups that we know existed. And that's where we as staff worked with the consultant to develop a list. So that was over 50 groups that we reached out to. So the ones that were on the screen there are only the ones who responded, but more than that got invited. So only about half of them ended up participating. So I think we got good uptake there and good feedback. And then now, which if I could segue into the roundtable, I was going to just make a few remarks. Now we're at the point where we're going to put it back to Lees and Associates to start creating a draft strategy with the input. Before we move to that, we want this committee, now that this committee's seen what we've heard from the public, we want this committee to have an opportunity of what do you think is missing in the what we've heard that should be included in the draft strategy. Keeping in mind, you know, we're still talking high level of what's important, you know, not very specific projects. But I think that's a really important discussion that I hope you guys will spend some time on in this committee meeting discussing, so we can get clear direction to us as staff and to Lees and Associates and their team to start putting together a draft. And maybe not to steal their thunder, but when they talk about next steps, once we have the draft, then we're going to go back to the public and community groups and say, this is the draft we've created. What do you think? So they have another opportunity to now share their ideas specifically on what ideas we're bringing forward. So leave it at that. Put it back to you, Chair. Yeah, if there's anything further from Kevin or Sherry to add.
Thank you, Mr. Vieira. I have some comments, but anybody else from the committee would like to comment? So what's missing, perhaps you want to see more of at the next stage? Director Morris?
Is my unmute feature working?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent, thank you. Apologies for not being actually in the room with you. Just an overarching question. Were there in the survey with all of the potential user groups that were identified, and thank you for that, Ivy. Were there areas of specific congestion, conflict that were raised as the issues? The second question is also in that process, were there any key priority expansion areas that came out of the feedback at a kind of like a top level is really where I was going with that. I just completed a conversation of particular spot within, for example, Area P, where there clearly is some congestion and conflict and whatnot. So I'm curious if that is a general sense throughout the area that we're talking about. Laura had.
I can answer that, Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wouldn't say we heard about specific areas per se, even though we did try to group our user groups by electoral area. So we were kind of talking about the same relative areas, but the TNRD is such a large area that it was really difficult to kind of hone in on a specific trail or specific area per se. But within the realm of user group conflicts, talking about trails, we did hear about specific user like areas. So that would be like non-motorized versus motorized user groups. We did hear a little bit about that. Dog owners and non-dog owners. That's a common thread that we heard as well. So those two kind of jump out to me, but there were no geographic areas that we could necessarily pinpoint per se.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. And Director Onslow.
Thank you. Just one thing that I didn't really notice, but that I do think we need to pay attention to would be for groups that have access to front and backcountry recreation. So snowmobile clubs or the ATVing, etc. That maybe I don't know even if that falls under the whole scope of this, but I do want to say that is very important for communities to have access into the Crown lands. And then access to water as well. And I didn't see that that was like the high priority on the list, but I do think what I've heard is that it is an important thing for people within the TNRD.
Thank you, Director Onslow. Yeah, maybe Ms. Smith, you can make note for the next stage of the engagement process. Thank you. Director Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. So I had a couple of questions when I was looking at that list of people that you had engaged. Was there gaps in it in certain areas where we did not have enough? What's the word I want? We didn't have enough participants maybe from any particular area, and we were more heavily weighed in another areas. So my question would be, was it very inclusive in that we had equal participation from different areas? Or do we need to be maybe reaching out to some of those areas where we didn't have as much engagement?
Yeah, Ms. Smith, if you can speak to that, thank you.
Okay, let me just think about that. Good questions today, everyone. This is great.
You have, sorry, if I may jump in.
Go ahead.
Ivy, if you have the report open, page 22 has a breakdown of the participation in the survey. We did work really hard to get the word out in all the different electoral areas, and I think the user groups with such a large number of user groups helped us get good representation across the region, and kind of dive into like the specifics of the geography and the parks and the relationship with industry in the different areas. If that makes sense. We got to hear from backcountry snowmobile and PTV and, you know, and around Kamloops mountain bikes.
Thank you, Ms. Smith and Mr. Beach.
I have a couple
Director
more.
Thorpe. Yeah, supplemental from Director Thorpe.
Another question. Mobility issues. Did we have engagement for groups that would represent people with mobility issues when we looked at this?
Yeah, we did actually. We had, as I mentioned, we had a meeting with the TNRD Accessibility Committee. So that was a great meeting where we heard a lot about accessibility and particularly mobility issues. We also had some representatives from health entities that represented groups with mobility issues as well. Those are the two that come to the top of my mind in terms of who we heard from in terms of the community groups. But the survey also captured just the general public, and we did hear about accessibility and mobility in the survey as well.
Thank you, Director Houghton.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. Being from a background in agriculture, is there a part of this that is reaching out to agricultural tourism? It's in certain areas of the TNRD. It is an important part of the economy. I just look at the South Caribou country where there's lodges and they have horseback riding trails and what have you. And then there's a British Columbia group called the Backcountry Horsemen that go out through the province on trails. And it'd be nice to have an agricultural tourism component to this, because I think it is an up and coming recreational sport.
Thank you, Director. So Ms. Smith, yeah, could you include that as a focus for the next, over to staff, Mr. Vieira?
Yeah, through the chair, Backcountry Horsemen were one of the groups that were involved in this list. And also I know Caribou Chilcote and Coast Tourism does a lot with guest ranches, and they participated in the survey. Yeah. And I believe.
Thank you, Ms. Madden.
And the Grasslands Association with Mike was involved, and the
Yeah.
Cattlemen's Association was also invited, but I don't believe participated. So we did make sure that we did reach out to that agriculture component for sure. And with regards to, if I may speak to Director Thorpe's question about the involvement of the groups throughout the area and was it equitable? So as Jamie referred to previously, we did a lot of online research about the variety of different groups. And then we reached out to all of the directors and the municipalities to ask you guys to supplement and complement our stuff that we could find. So we could only work with what we could find. So if in the list, which is part of the report on the 27 who did participate out of the 50 that we had, if there's any other groups such as Director Smith indicated with ATVBC, if there's any other groups that you could provide to us that could possibly be incorporated into the round 2 engagement, that would be greatly appreciated. But we did focus with regards to ATVBC. We did have local ORV and local snowmobile clubs. So we did have local organizations within the TNRD boundaries that would fit within that as well, that powered motorsport type thing included within the groupings.
Thank you, Ms. Madden. Well, one group that, I got two groups I'd like to speak of. First Nations. I noticed that, of the TNRD, across TNRD, we've only had 3 First Nations that participated so far. I just want to stress how important that is to get them involved because from what I learned from the Shuswap Trail Alliance and understanding how Section 57s work from the Rec Sites and Trails representative who presented, First Nation engagement is required. And if we do all this stuff, all this planning, it would go to waste if at the end of the day they come back and say, hey, nobody, or we haven't signed on to this. And also from the board meeting yesterday, some of the interactions between First Nations and property owners, I understand that each First Nations have their own protocols and communication on who's responsible for what and how they would respond to other entities such as TNRD. I wonder if Lee and Associates could benefit from coordinating with our Mr. Corbin Kelly and the TNRD with to assist, and I will turn that over to staff for their comment on that. Ms. Madden was first. Mr. Vieira.
Yeah, thanks for that suggestion. Corbin has been involved in this through the whole process, and so he was working closely specifically on the First Nation engagement, so working closely with Sherry and with Ivy on that process. And so, yes, we've reached out to all the bands, and there's been little uptake at this point. My kind of expectation is that, there'll be more interest from bands and engagement if there's specific projects proposed on their territory. And that's what I think we're going to stress in the draft plan, that any proposed development, expansions, et cetera, that then we target consultation on that specific issue. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vieira, for that background. Director Lepso.
So on this subject, again, we started 14 years ago, and what we found out was Section 57, you go to Front Counter BC, and then they send out referrals. And so they send out referrals, but the Secwepemc or First Nations don't have any more staff to deal with the referrals. So they weren't replying within the 100 days because they don't have the staff and they have other issues. And we were going ahead and they were going, well, you didn't consult with us. Oh yeah, we sent to Front Counter BC, and they would just, no, you didn't. And it's sort of what you mentioned. So now we have all signed on to title and rights when it comes to do with hiking trails. And that's what's got us the buy-in. So we've acknowledged the Village of Chase, Salmon Arm, everybody in the Shuswap Trail Alliance has acknowledged title and rights when it comes to do with hiking trails. So we, as those that were at the meeting Tuesday. see, that's how, and it didn't happen overnight, right? You saw the trust that happened there, right? So that's the first contact. Right, is the Chiquetin. That's our first contact. That's we've got the buy-in. We don't do anything, nothing without their consent. And that's an opportunity for the TNRD, right? As we're exploring opportunities, as you mentioned yesterday, when these Chiquetin issues come, you know, the trails aren't, we're doing it for trails, but what we did was we're trying to contact the Chiquetin as we're trying to do, and trails was just an easy conduit to work on, right? Like it wasn't a big issue. So then when we work on other issues, we've created a relationship type thing. So it's a huge opportunity for the TNRD to create a better Chiquetin relationship through this. Like we need to have all of those Chiquetin and other communities and, you know, to buy in, I think, in my opinion.
Thank you, Director Lepso. Very good points that aligns with our strategic plan as well for the TNRD board as a whole with First Nation engagements. And so the second group that I would appreciate more outreach to at the next stage, like I said, business groups perhaps could be a bit of a focus on them to see if we can have some more business group involvement in the next stage. And with that being said, so moving on to item number 7, roundtable, opportunity for directors to provide further updates and feedback. Director Lepso.
Yeah, I didn't realize that's where we're at. And I just a question for Ivy. I see you contacted the Shuswap Trail Lines. Did you get any comments or takeaways when you contacted them?
Yeah, we had a great conversation. They participated in one of our workshops, and so yeah, we received feedback from them.
Thank you. Anyone else? Director Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I just, the reason I mention ATVBC is just because I know they're super active in this area. The president for ATVBC actually lives in the TNRD area, Jay, I believe. And it's been my experience the last few years, they bring in a lot of ridership to our area. And they actually contacted me just this morning, strangely enough for the timing. And there's a number of trails that have been traditionally used by that group in our area that have just recently been deactivated to a point where they're not even passable for any kind of a vehicle, never mind whether it's a bike or whatever it happens to be, cutting off access to things like Greenstone Mountain from this side, Mile High, that whole cutting off access actually to that whole area to a number of trails. So I'm not sure. I understand deactivating logging trails. I get that, but I think this is a little bit different than that. So I don't know. I think it would just be helpful to have some more communication because as we're doing this and trying to enhance our trail systems, there's other things that are happening in the background that are actually worse today than they were yesterday. Meanwhile, they're out there putting signage and all of these other things and investing time, volunteers' time and energy and funding into creating a system that's usable and understandable for people, and then it's completely destroyed. And it's actually interesting to me because I've been riding those trails pretty much my entire life and I've never seen them not usable. So I just wanted to mention that because it is, as recent as this morning that I've just heard that. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Smith. I see Director Onslow. I'm just going to make a comment to Director Smith's issue. Just sharing something similar that I've actually, not in terms of recreation, but for wildfire emergency access. Last summer, I had good thing I did run it by Scott or Mr. Hiltbrand and Mr. Kelly. My idea of advocating to the Ministry of Forest about the activation of some of these roads, which prevents foot access or ground access to some of these wildfires in Area A. It was a good thing I ran it by them because there were other issues such as First Nations and their strategies for access to their territory, which has to be, respected and considered. So I wonder if ATVBC has sometimes like the deactivation could be requested by the First Nations, which I respect. And I wonder if ATVBC, could try reaching out to see maybe that, push for deactivation is coming from them and maybe having chats. And then also with regards to the Shuswap Trail Alliance, again, the roundtable, I love that. That was a great forum for all stakeholders from the First Nations to, I think the Four-Wheel Drive Association of BC was there yesterday. I saw some gentleman with a cap, not yesterday, the other day. And for them to all come together, and they have sub-regional maps, and everybody who has presence in that area come together and spend an hour, talk about it. We unfortunately don't have that in such a body in TNRD, but yeah, just sharing my thoughts. Thank you. And Director Onslow.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to go to what Director Smith was talking about, and I think that echoes the access to the backcountry for these motorized user groups, as well as the horses or however else people are getting there. But I do think it is a very, very important topic for the economies of our communities to maintain that access as well. And from what I heard at the meeting on Tuesday was from one of the First Nations ladies who was there, was talking about how many hundreds of thousands of kilometers that BC has that into the backcountry. It was something like 600,000 kilometers, not even that they're FSR roads, but they're roads that have been dissecting the land, and that is causing a huge concern. And so I think if we were to be able to work with our First Nations groups within the TNRD and have the designated areas, and I know it comes down to Section 57s, and I know there's just so much more to it than what I understand. But I think maintaining access and is a huge priority for my community, certainly. But anyway, those are my thoughts on that.
Thank you, Director Onslow. Director Morris. Oh,
Okay.
sorry. Oh,
Muted. Can you hear me now?
yes, we can.
Thank you. Just a couple of things to add to the conversation. Certainly, and Director Lepso's comments. Excuse me, I think my cat just decided to join in here. Certainly that comment around that our First Nations, it needs to be an auto check, literally. I mean, that has to be incorporated at every step of the way. I hear a lot of comments about front counter being really slow on things as well. Don't know if you folks have as well. And looking at the basically sort of lending that support to BC Parks is also one, where it seems certainly within Area P, if and where we do have conflicts on overuse and misattention, etc., to some pretty unique locations and sites, that there aren't sufficient resources for BC Parks in particular to be out there and addressing the issues. And so chronically, what is occurring, at least in my area, are the complaints that come forward but with no obvious path for resolution on them. And then the ever-present comment that I make, which is around the Crown land and the interface and how we approach that. So what I see is there's still, certainly within Area P, lots of areas where we still have a lot of a consultation that needs to happen in order to, if we want to expand the trails and the sites and address a lot of the congestion conflicts that are occurring in, at least in my area. So that's and then there's one other quick question, Jamie, maybe to you on this one. And there was one of the questions that was posed to me too is what about this whole process of taxing within areas and some sort of a mill rate approach? And I know we've looked at it in some areas, so I just want to keep it on the back burner as one of our options in terms of the go forwards, and whether we could ever create partnerships that included included the park system as well as some level of mill rate. And I know we've tested it, but just let's keep it on the burner, as it were. So those are my only comments on that, except thank you, Director Lepso, with the assistance that you often give me in terms of some just working together with a number of the First Nations as well. I appreciate that input as well on a regular basis.
Thank you, Director Morris. Over to Mr. Vieira.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and to Director Morris. I was actually making myself a note to actually bring up the taxation piece just for a discussion topic here. So thanks for that. So some background for the committee, or as a reminder, we have two mechanisms currently that we tax within the TNRD for park services. So we have electoral area taxation. So just the rural area within the boundaries of the electoral area fund local community parks, at least in some of the electoral areas. In some areas, we have no community parks, so there's no taxation. But the service exists in all electoral areas. And then we have the regional parks function, which is funded by all electoral areas and all municipalities combined. So I think something that and maybe this is a time to bring it up that I wanted the committee to consider is just discussion around how you want that to look going forward in terms of in the strategy. Should there be a heavier focus on more regional, larger destination style parks, or should the focus be on development of community parks? Like when I say community parks, I'm picturing more playground things that are just benefiting the local community versus a more regional benefit approach. And not to say it can't be both, but I think it'd be good, this committee, to have some discussion around that, because I know you hear a lot from constituents, and I know the board has even brought this up as part of our strategic planning, this idea of more destination style regional service, the regional parks and trails.
Thank you, Mr. Vieira. I'll make, excuse me, comments as Area A representative. I think I mentioned this before at our last meeting. For me, when I looked at the preliminary findings, that Area A is really well developed in terms of community park supports and developments compared to the other electoral areas, which are really underserved. I personally would like to, be fair to those electoral areas directors, to offer them first dibs for support in development of community parks before we spend any more resources on, Area A, for example. So that's my comments from Area A. And Director Lepso.
Yeah, you keep giving me the look. So the issue is Jamie's brought up. I see like there's a regional versus municipality, not versus, but it's two things, right? Regional and municipal, and how.
Yeah, if I can clarify, the regional service includes payment from municipalities. So the regional service everyone pays into, and currently there's only 3 three functions of the regional parks function. That's the river buoy system in the Thompson River, and then Little Hell's Gate and the Barrier Forks Park. Those were all established many years ago, and really what's defined as a regional versus an electoral area park hasn't really been defined. And that's something that we think is important to include in this strategy. And so that's why I bring it up for discussion at this committee is what should the focus be, and what is that? What's your vision for community parks versus regional?
Supplemental.
Yeah, and so that's always the thing with the region and municipality, because so we just pay and do a park. So like for Chase, we just have a park. We just pay for it and do it. And just so anything regional, when you raise money, it's different somewhat to.
Mr. Vieira?
Well, yeah, I think if I understand you correctly, Director Lepso, like, are you, the concept is a regional park should be a benefit to both the municipalities and the electoral areas. So for example, using the river buoy system in the Thompson River, it's benefiting Kamloops, benefits Chase. It's a destination. It makes the Thompson River navigable. So it's a fairly big ticket item that at current function, the way it's set up is everyone pays into that service. Whereas a community park that's in Area A, for example, Ferry Road Park, only residents pay into that, with the concept being that that's just benefiting the local community. There's not a giant regional, a broad regional benefit to it. But that's what I think this discussion should explore further.
Thank you, Mr. Vieira. And supplemental.
I never know how far I'm getting ahead on things, because like I say, we've been doing this for 14 years, and this is just starting on the page. And yeah, so when you do the regional trails go in, so like with the trail lines, there's very limited funding, right? Individually, it's a very simple funding formula. And but it's different between what a municipality does and what the region does. Is what there's a difference on what can be done and what not, and how it's done. And
thank you, Director Lepp. So if Mr. Vieira can confirm my understanding, so there's actually quite a few types. Like there's the municipal parks, which, for example, a park in Clearwater, that District of Clearwater taxpayer pays into, which Area A does not. And then there's Area A community parks, which District of Clearwater doesn't pay into. And then there's regional parks. And then there's also trails, which are volunteer organizations such as the Backcountry Horsemen. They've actually recently in my area asked for a grant to repair some bridges, and those trails are not TNRD related. So those are outside the scope of this strategy, I believe. Is that correct, Mr. Vieira?
Yeah, I wouldn't say they're outside of the scope of the strategy. I think a lot of what we heard and what Ivy presented there was this idea of having some sort of support for the TNRD to help these existing groups navigate, processes to get funding or permitting, things like that. So I think that's yet to be determined. So I guess I'll share my opinion that I don't think that TNRD should take on and operate all the parks that exist or all the trails that exist in the TNRD. I think there's a lot of groups doing an excellent job of that. But the strategy could identify how can the TNRD support those existing groups, those existing trail networks, or those existing parks, even without us actually operating them. Is there a role to play? Maybe, maybe not. Is there a grant and aid mechanism, or is there some sort of staff support in terms of navigating the policy? Those are all up for discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Vieira. Director Onslow, sorry.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to talk briefly about the community parks versus the regional parks. I like the idea of identifying other locations for regional parks and looking at the regional parks that are already here. So the 3 parks, should those 3 still be regional, or should one be a community park or not, whatever. So I think that if our community or this group were to look at that and identify potential new regional parks. And then from what I'm seeing, I just was looking at the proposed budget, but as an example for the community parks, like there's certain areas that are lacking in community parks and they don't pay for a park if they don't have it that's my understanding. So like in area B, we're paying about $9 per 100,000 assessed value for our community parks. Area O is paying $1.32, and that would indicate to me that they just don't have as many expenses with their parks. Whereas everybody within the TNRD is paying 8 cents per 100,000 assessed value on the 3 regional parks to support those parks. So identifying new regional parks and also identifying where the community parks and if the taxpayers want to pay for their community parks is probably a priority. I also really like the idea of the TNRD being able to support our nonprofit organizations and groups that maintain the trails and are doing a phenomenal job of that. And I think in supporting them, we could look at however that looks, whether it's the grant and aid possibly as a ongoing funding mechanism, but also helping them to apply for grants and maintain their access. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Onslow. Director Smith?
Thank you, Chair. I just talking about, sort of, first of all, I just want to touch on if some of those deactivations are Indigenous, government led in some way, which very well may be possible. It would just be good to know because then people would understand, why they're doing what they're doing out in the landscape. And if it's about, protecting certain areas or, just, I think some of those areas should actually be celebrated and that actually adds interest to me along the trail system to say, and you don't have to, be super specific about, what's there that you're protecting other than to say, this is, traditional berry picking land or medicinal, here for medicinal purposes. And we want to, avoid these areas for those reasons. I think that actually adds more interest to me. I would love to see an opportunity for connecting our communities to each other through the backcountry, and whether it's by bike, ATV, walking, hiking, horseback, and strategically moving those people in those trail systems where we can through our regional parks. I think it would be kind of cool to be able to look at a map and say, hey, I can do a 7-day hike from here to wherever I happen to want to go. And I can do that by, however it happens to be. That's just, but I really think that Indigenous values add to our backcountry and knowing what those values are and talking about them and making sure that others understand also, what they are and why they are is, like I say, I think it just adds more interest.
Thank you, Director Smith. I'll comment on that. Yes, I 100% agree with you. A mechanism of communication from First Nations to stakeholders, including TNRD, would be great. Perhaps maybe Mr. Vieira, you can share that with Mr. Kelly. Case in point, like what I went through last summer, I was like, well, to be honest, it would have been nice to know. And even with my alternate being a First Nation councillor, I was not aware of that fact. So yes, maybe we can direct Mr. Kelly to do something about that. So you want to make a comment, Mr. Vieira?
Yeah, I just have a comment specifically on the road deactivation. It's an issue more than just access for recreation. It's becoming an issue for emergency egress. And this has come up recently, the same issue you're talking about on our planning side and our emergency management side. And I'm just saying from staff point of view, we agree and we're there's some staff to staff discussion going on of how we need to have, local government needs to be better informed and engaged on deactivations at the very least, so we're aware that they're happening. Because yeah, in this case, we weren't aware until it was brought forward by residents just a few weeks ago. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Vieira. I'll just wrap up on my agreement also with a new term that I learned from the Alliance Roundtable, linear trails and parks. I love that term. Yes, perhaps that could be added to the priority. You know, we were talking about priority was about community parks and also regional parks. A major opportunity, including economically, is linear trails between different communities. So yeah, if we can all note that. And Ms. Director Hooten, you have something to add to this?
Actually,
comment?
it's on the same subject. Would Jamie or Sherry, do you have a contact with Ministry of Forests that you could reach out on the specific case of Director Smith's up there? The lady in question happens to be my sister-in-law that's the head of the ATV club up there, and she sent me the same note that Director Smith got, and there's got to be somebody responsible for those certain trails. And I'm just hoping that maybe you have a contact that you could reach out and get back to Director Smith.
Yeah, I know Mike Knopf, our emergency program coordinator, has already reached out, and we have actually another meeting on the same topic later this afternoon on a staff level. And just for clarification, it's roads that are being deactivated by the user. It's not an authorized trail system, but the whole access to backcountry access for recreation is the issue. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Vieira. Director Lepso.
So I got two things at this time. So the greatest thing about this is to legalize the trails, right? So people were using trails all the years, and then, oh, I can't use it. Well, you never had a legal right to begin with to use the trail. And then as soon as that user stops using it, the trail just goes away, right? So that's the idea of legalizing them. And I actually did work in road deactivation, FRBC, years ago. And what is it? The forestry company has 5-year plans. Every forestry company has this is where they're going to go, I think, has a 5-year plan. And if you want to be on that list, they'll contact you. So every year you can be on the list, and they'll tell you what they're doing for 5 years. Like every road has a certain level of deactivation. Is it going to be crew cab accessible? Is it 4-wheel drive accessible? Is it going to be able to be rehabbed in 5 years, 10 years, or the 25-year one where you just come in with a cat? In 25 years, if there's a forest fire, you have all the dirt in front of your ditch, and then the cat can just come along and the roads, and there you go. There's the road. So there is a plan. You just have to get on the forestry list and be at the meeting every year for the forestry company, because I think that's most of who controls the roads there. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Director Lepso. Sounds like we could have further discussions between directors and staff on this topic later. Thank you. With that being said, any further comments for the roundtable section? No? Okay. Oh, sorry, Mr. Vieira.
I had another kind of bomb I wanted to lob out there for discussion. And you know, there's been a lot of talk about Shuswap Trail Alliance and just some consideration discussion at this committee about you know, what this, again, the strategy is going to be high level, but how do we tackle it, whatever the strategy is as the TNRD? One of the considerations being, is there sort of a sub-regional approach maybe? Like, for example, the Shuswap Trail Alliance, CSRD and the communities and the municipalities around there are heavily involved, but it's not the entire CSRD. Its focuses on the Shuswap, right? TNRD is even bigger than the CSRD. So, you know, is there thoughts, discussion around a sub-regional approach? North Thompson's very different than, you know, the Fraser Canyon. And they're far apart, they're different users.
Thank you, Mr. Vieira. Ms. Director Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I was kind of wondering that too, like, as I'm thinking about how that would work in terms of like, if you're trying to connect communities, you know, maybe you could have groups that are already looking after the trail systems as it is and just say, okay, you know, hey, this trail stops in the Logan Lake Outdoor Association area, we stop here, and then from here to here, it's taken on by whatever, group happens to be the one that's already kind of maintaining that trail, and maybe even signage to say, hey, you're leaving this trail system, you're entering into this group's trail system, so that maybe there's some buy-in from the groups that are already maintaining the trail system to sort of almost sponsor, certain segments. That's just my thoughts.
Thank you, Director Smith. I'll make a comment on that. Yeah, that's one of the conversations I had with Director Lepso from the roundtable, the Shuswap Traillands roundtable, is that I wish we had this, and it's all it's not funded from the government level. There was a sorry, forgot his surname, but there was a Phil who's the catalyst of that alliance, and we need to find these people within these user groups who are catalysts, who wants to do more, who wants to outreach to other groups. And so I wonder if perhaps, I'm not sure if it would be outside the scope of Lee and Associates consultancy. At the next stage, since you already are having these discussions with the user groups, maybe add in a question in there. Would you be interested in forming a sub-regional group with others? Maybe Ms. Smith, would you like to speak to that if that's okay?
Yeah, that's certainly something we can consider in the next round of engagement.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Director Lepso.
Yeah, so I don't know where staff's wanting right now. However, I see like a lot of these questions are, so Mike Simpson's the facilitator for the trail lines. Like a lot of these questions, he'll just nail. I don't know, like with Ivy Smith, like where we're at with right now, but yeah, so he'll be able to answer a lot of these things. And the greatest part was the uniformity, right? Like the Trail Alliance, if I just keep going on that, it's a model for the whole province. Everybody's following that. It's actually a level of government, as you saw. There was, right, it wasn't just trails. There was a lot of other business that went on, right, at that meeting. And the uniformity is great. Like when you go in Kamloops and you try to hike, every trail is different. And so when you look at liability, right, like, and that's what the Trail Lines has dealt with a lot of this stuff already. I don't know the level of the consultants and when this ties in, but it just helps with everything, because all the trail systems are marked the same. It's all the same. So when you go into an area, everything's the same. And like Kamloops is just such a hodgepodge, right? Like there's no kilometers. So the trail lines at every intersection, right? There's a sign. Every intersection, there's a sign, and the kilometers either way. And it's not just a hodgepodge of workers. It's, it brings everybody together. And then it's done professionally. You get professional guidance.
Thank you, Director Lepso. On that issue, I wonder, the committee and staff can give comments, my thoughts. So like we said, at the next stage with Lee and Associates, with the engagement with the community, the user groups, reach out to them if anybody wants to take this on in their region. And pending the results of that, maybe this committee can recommend to the board to either engage further with Lee and Associates to guide them, or engage with Fraser Basin Council for them to help us with that. Mr. Vier?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I got some comments on that. I think the kind of the concept you're talking about is, in terms of ongoing support and getting groups together, that's something that what I'm hearing coming to the surface will be included in our strategy, or at least in our draft strategy. So the idea that the TNRD should facilitate, if I could paraphrase what I'm hearing, facilitate, the coordination of roundtable groups, maybe sub-regionally, to try get user groups going. We're not going to do that as part of this strategy, but the strategy is going to say we should do that. And then the board gives us direction to do that. We have resources to go do that. And then we start that process. And then at that point is when we'll decide, is that being done by staff in-house? Are we looking for consultants to do that? The scope of Lees and Associates work is to get us a strategy created and run us through the consultation process. Another point I just wanted to clarify with the discussion in the room here is, and again, stealing a bit of thunder of what Ivy was going to speak about next. The next step in the process is creating the draft strategy. And then what I didn't clarify is that draft strategy is going to come back to this committee before we go back to the public for the second round of engagement. So there's good discussion here and good feedback for what we're going to do in the second round, but you'll get another chance both to look and comment on the draft strategy and make further comments on how we do the second round of engagement before we do that.
Thank you, Mr. Vieira. Director Hutton.
Just to the consultants, just a word of caution, being in the ranching business and how we know that deeded land is interdispersed with crown land. There's no one block of either. And just to be a word of caution when we're doing all this planning is make sure that we're sticking to the crown land, or ask the permission of the deeded landholders. I can't see them getting involved in something like this, but just making sure we're sticking to the crown land and then working with the licensees that already have access to the land. I'm just thinking of folks with cattle grazing rights that are out there. You know, they love to work with people, but if we just barge in and start making trails, we should consult with them too and make sure that we're working with them. So, because there's other users of the backcountry besides just trail users. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Hutton. Any further comments on this? Otherwise, I will give the thunder back to Ms. Smith. Oh, sorry, Ms. Smith from Lee and Associates. Mr. Vieira, you were saying she has, yeah. Over to you.
Yeah, we can move on to the next steps, number 8.
Great. Thanks for the great discussion. So we have 2 subsequent meetings scheduled so far with the standing committee. And the next one will be March 5th, 2025. We'll introduce and cover key highlights from the draft strategic plan, as well as provide an overview of the second round of engagement plan. We'll then take the draft and the plan for second round of engagement. We'll go back to the public with the draft and gather feedback. And then we have another meeting May 14th, 2025 for covering the second round of engagement highlights and findings, as well as implications for the final strategic plan. We'll then make some changes. We'll make the changes to the strategic plan based off of the engagement, your feedback, staff feedback. And then as of right now, we don't have any other future meetings scheduled, but the final draft will be shared in the summer at some point.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Over to Mr. Vieira.
Yeah, thank you. And if I may add to that, so the way it rolls out here, we are very likely going to need another committee meeting that's not currently scheduled. So sometime, because the idea is that in the May 14th meeting, this committee is going to hear what we heard in the final round of engagement and proposed final amendments to the draft plan. So if there's further direction from this committee to include in that final draft plan, then we'll take it back, make those adjustments, bring it back to this committee as a final for this committee to approve and recommend that the board approve the final plan. And then ultimately it'll go to the board for adoption.
Thank you, Mr. Vieira, for that timetable. Okay, moving on to, that's it. Sorry, Director Lepso.
So on the engagement, is that when is there gonna be any other type of engagement with the full board? That like on the process we're going through, or is it?
That's a good comment, actually. We haven't thought that through in too much detail, but I think once we have the draft plan, once this committee reviews the draft plan and we go out to the public and back to the stakeholders, we'll include specific engagement with the board on this is our draft plan. You know, is this maybe we could bring that to the committee of the whole before we go to public or at the same time? So then the board is aware of what's in the draft that's going public at that time. It could be presented for discussion. But open to input for this committee. I mean, the board has delegated this committee to work on it, but I think that would be appropriate if the committee wanted us to present the draft plan to the board that way.
Or Mr. Lopes or do we need a motion to have that? No.
We don't need a motion and we don't need to decide right now, but I mean, if the committee likes that idea, then we can plan to, I don't have the schedule up in front of me right now, but after this committee reviews the draft, we can plan to add it to a committee of the whole agenda sometime in the spring.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vier. Okay, any further comments online or offline? Okay, no, then I call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Hey, I just have a quick question for people online.
Oh,
Did
sorry.
you guys, this is not part of the committee, but my screen has been fairly glitchy. Have you guys noticed that on your end? And do I need to talk to IT about my computer or the TNRD recording?
My screen was okay. My biggest problem was the cameras flicking back and forth in the room. So if you were actually having like a screen problem, that might be an IT issue that we need to look at your device.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the meeting.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.